When I released my first video in this series talking about the Helsmiths of Hashut, there's a lot of discussion in the comments about a remark I made towards the end of that video. And it was the remark that Hashut may actually just be a demon instead of a Duarden god. And I love the back and forth that goes in my head about this, and so I wanted to share it with you good folks as more of a discussion video. Now, this is to state up top that I don't think there's any definitive conclusions drawn from this book alone, so if you are a Helsmiths of Hashut player and you love the idea that this is all true, exactly what Hashut says is accurate, then you know what? It is for your forces. Because there's absolutely nothing really contradicting it. It's just an interesting concept that we're going to talk about. Because this discussion is about playing with the more murky ideas surrounding the lore of AOS. It's about feeling too clever for our own good, and probably projecting about the writer's intent more than we should. So, it's like, shop talk at a game store. And so, to kind of go through my discussion here, we're generally familiar with the story of Hashut according to him, the eldest brother of the Duarden gods, despised and cursed by his kin, sealed away, erased from history, until the Age of Chaos when he crept back in. Now, here are some points in favor of that story. If you want the full details, go check out the first video in my Helsmiths of Hashut series. But here's the thing, a point for him is that Hashut's story has an answer for how Grimnir and Grogni got tied up at the beginning of the setting. When it all began, there was just this idea of Sigmar walking across the realms and he finds the two tied up on top of a mountain. No idea how they got there. It was actually very weird. Well, by his own account, Hashut sabotaged the two brothers. Grimnir was given some kind of trinket that would make him fly off the handle with rage, which is ultimately how he got body checked by Volcatrix so hard that he shattered into a billion pieces, and that's what the Fire Slayers have been picking up and using since the Age of Myth. Grogni, on the other hand, was given an artifact that seems to destabilize his moods, although there's not a lot of detail on that. All we know is that it made him weep uncontrollably. Of course, shortly after this, he abandoned all of the Duarden children that he had throughout the lands and just sealed himself away. In the meantime, tying himself to mountains. Normal stuff. And knowing the fate of those two characters, it does not seem unreasonable. Because, frankly, I like how this paints Grimnir as sabotaged rather than being so suicidally up his own butt that he got himself killed. It lines up much better. Some other things that line up, as far as if we're taking aspects of this story that kind of read true, the fable of the Duarden origins taking place in Zorn. It was a great Duarden hold that was destroyed by Valea's forces when Hashut and Valea both disappeared. But some temples remained, and then those would be rediscovered by the reconstructed Zorn centuries later. My point is, this is archaeological evidence. Those temples that were supposedly built in the place of Hashut's original OG home were found. They were built by dwarves. This was the place, whatever the actual history, account says, this seems to be a place that was important. It's where Hashut supposedly worked his demon forge. Also, in this location, fast forward to now, we have more mutations happening in Zorn than any other forge hold. Which, just to throw this as anecdotal evidence, would make a great deal of sense if this was the place where Hashut, it was his home, and this is the place where he punched through to the realm of chaos. It's not one-to-one evidence, but it's, it's something. It's enough to wrap your tinfoil hat up. I mean, when I think about this as far as the points in favor of this story being true, these arguments are better proof than when people talk very confidently about the sex lives of Space Marines in 40k debates. Which means what? I think we're moving in a good direction as far as evidence goes. But even as I read this account and go through the evidence and stuff, one thing becomes definitely clear in that nothing in this story specifically verifies Hashut's claims. Yes, the account of the history of the Duarden that gives us answers to age-old questions is there, but that's not evidence, that's just a story. In fact, if you just for a moment briefly presupposed that Hashut was lying about his past, nothing actually changes. If this was a Tzeentch demon or some unaligned chaos demon that do happen to manifest randomly, it's doing what demons do. It's giving a little bit of help in exchange for worship and action in the physical world. The worship you give it makes it stronger, and of course, a demon would be willing to sell out his kin, meaning the other lesser demons who get ground up into powder and used as gunpowder. Like that's like the least surprising thing of all. I'm sure if Be'lakor thought of this scheme, he'd be trimming his horns to look more like a bull wearing a Chicago Bulls windbreaker with his Jordans on. He would be coming doing the full thing. So it is not unreasonable to assume that something has kind of taken the mantle and just sold a story to desperate people. And to that end, we have to keep in mind exactly when Hashut was rediscovered, when all of these things happened. It was their moment of greatest desperation. It's not hard to believe that they were told a story and wanted to believe it. If it's a demon of some kind, I think it's fair to say that it's become a minor chaos power in its own right, nowhere near the tier of the big five, 4 classic gods plus the horned rat, but enough to influence and maintain a steady cult following. And if you were a demon who needed to grow organically, so to speak, and last throughout the ages, attaching yourself to an empire like the Duardin, who live long, they can thrive, they're highly innovative and destructive, that's not a bad idea. And some of the stuff that the Helsmiths of Hashut are required to do as part of like their worship, dedication, and their rituals, it just sounds so bold-faced demonic, right? Like it's an active god, first of all, that demands blood sacrifices. Blood magic is a big part of the way that demons are forced into their creations. The book describes anything they do as like desecrating, foul, hateful. It seems so on the nose to be chaos undivided, but with a mask of something familiar, which, quite frankly, is often how cults in our real world work as well. Right? You start with a familiar story. In our case here in the States, it's generally Christianity of some kind. And the leader says, I have a new way to look at that, or a new step forward, or revelation upon it. And that takes you on a course away from the rest of the quote-unquote mainstream believers. And that's essentially what happened to them, right? The history of their people could have been hijacked into a new story. And those are all my thoughts in as far as opposing Hashut's narrative, what could be actually going on. But the thing is, to call this entire story an outright lie, there's no evidence of that either. And to be honest, that is the fault of the other Duardin in the game setting. Because of their shame, the shame felt by the Fire Slayers, the Karajan Overlords, and all the Duardin who escaped to Azir, no one has a written record of the development of the Helsmiths of Hashut from any other perspective, which is frankly why I like this debate. If everyone was not so blinded by their own shame, they could have seen what was happening, which the core, book is a unreliable narrator because nobody else wanted to look. Nobody else wanted to help. Nobody else was there. Other than pointing out it could be a demon, there isn't a lot of evidence for that other than his followers acting super chaosy, which, in and of itself isn't a specific offering that Hashut wants. It's not like, Nurgle asking someone to go spread plague and disease. That tribe might know him by a different name, but what he wants them to do is Nurgly. There's no specific thing other than, I guess, maybe creation and innovation with pain, but pain specifically is not, Hashut's thing. I don't know. My point being is he's not a god of a thing other than just being really into the Helsmiths. In fact, Hashut seems quite content to limit himself to these particular Duardin, which doesn't seem to be something you would imagine a chaos demon or whatever would. I know that there was that old warband a while ago where there was some humans. That is completely glossed over, like it never happened in this book, and that's typically how I read them, is whatever the actual material is now is how it is or was ever. So that's a bit of a bummer. I think there could have been more work, but it's interesting to me that this deity seems to be perfectly content here. And remember that, their ultimate goal is to destroy everybody, chaos included. So I'm not sure. But here in the video, I wanted to postulate a third option. somewhere in the middle in terms of accuracy. So as I was reading the book again and again, because I kept rereading the same stories to try and get in my mind some loose points that would point in favor or whatever, but there's a middleman here, and that is, what if Hashut's story is accurate until he steps into the realm of chaos? Then, while he's in there working on his forge, maybe some aspect or memory or shadow of him is left there, almost like, again, a photo negative. Then he comes out, Valea shatters Hashut as the story went on, but in the realm of chaos, creatures warp, twist, and infuse this aspect or shadow of Hashut into what we have now. Now, is there specific evidence of that? No, there's just as much evidence of that story as the other ones we covered here today. But what I find interesting about this one is it explains how he can be around and still be dead because of Valea, how his, machinations seem so demonic, but if there is this loose aspect that actually was the truth of the story, this older brother Hashut who loves his dwarves, then they would be bound and guided by that consciousness that they're trying to coerce or co-opt. Which would make the interesting debate of, is it Hashut or a demon? And the answer is yes and, or either or. Which to me makes some really compelling drama, because that's kind of how I feel about Morathi, right? Like, yes, she presents as the sacred goddess of girl bosses across the realm, and that part is accurate, but there's also a heaping pile of bullcrap that she's built a fortress of, which is this whole thing about Cain. So it's like a yes with an asterisk as far as like, is this all true? And that's just like the most weight-bearing asterisk in the history of the mortal realms kind of a thing. It's sort of like that, which I think is fantastic. It creates drama and intrigue. You can have different sects of the different faction, or the same faction rather, believe different truths based on what they've personally witnessed. It's intriguing. And whether or not like it's, demons taking over an aspect that was left in the realm of chaos, or one that's kind of molding itself into that guise, my question then is, if the Helsmiths of Hashut believe Hashut to be a certain thing, does that not make him that way? Like, does he start to conform to their beliefs while also changing theirs? I don't know. It's an interesting thing, and I love that kind of stuff about the AOS universe and the way that deities walk amongst their followers, and it's just all cool. So, on that note, let's end this video like we end all of them. Is Hashut himself or a demon? Why is that a cool idea? If your faction is going to be based around a character, this is the level of drama and intrigue that I want. Because to me, it would not even matter if Hashut was a playable model like Nagash. His background alone makes him, in my mind, more intriguing than, say, Ushran, who is again one of those figures that's meant to be the main character of a faction. Yes, there's a lot of really cool, interesting background around Ushran's past. Not as much surrounding who he is now. Right, we can't figure out who or what Hashut is now while he's making moves. The Daughters of Cain have trouble understanding who Morathi is now while they're doing things. And I love that question of knowledge and being blinded by faith and reason and all the things that blind people in these factions, Daughters of Cain and Helsmiths of Hashut. But I like it because they're trying to push events forward for themselves. This question is dominating their thoughts. Am I being lied to? You're either constantly suppressing the nagging feeling that something's wrong, or you are reveling in the fact that you don't think about that at all. You are a zealot. Either way, it creates fantastic stories. And to be honest, at this point, now that they've built their culture and their iconography and their worldview around Hashut, whatever it is, I also feel like if some Azerite priest walked into like a ziggurat and was like, clearly that's a demon, all the Helsmiths of Hashut would just put on their bull masks and be like, big if true, right? And they just not believe him. Because they've had enough stuff demonstrated to them that they don't need anyone else's approval for what they're doing. They got results. So I would love to hear, what do you think? To me personally, as I mentioned before, I love the idea that there is a point at which his story becomes lies. I don't have a whole lot of attachment to the old world, characters of Grimnir and Grugni and Valea and that kind of stuff. So like them having this new kind of drama amongst them doesn't bother me. I know for some people they're like, that doesn't really sound like them. I don't have that same weight to it. But I would love the idea of what if whatever reignited from the kindles of Hashut's spirit is him, but also not. Because it seems, like I said, a photo-negative, a dark perversion of all the things that he was. Dwarven culture, dwarven supremacy, dignity, nobility, all this stuff, just inverted. To me, I think it's a compelling question. I don't want a definitive answer, if I'm totally true with you. I would like more clues that the story is more complex, but not a definitive answer. Like, if you laid out a story that had a reason why he seems like a total demon and another reason why, like, no, but there's another really good clue as to that he knows more than anyone else, so he might actually be Hashut. I love that stuff. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. I will catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video and Helsmiths of Hashut video. Happy wargaming, friends!